Hi everyone, welcome to King's Plate Cooking, where today we're going to be cooking these beef ribs on our Pit Boss smoker. We're going to start them off with a rub down from the Adams Rib Rubb, and then we're going to put them in the smoker at 250 for the first 3 hours to really get that smoke binding, and then we're going to spritz it every hour on the hour until we hit an internal temperature of 203. It's going to be an exciting cook, it's going to taste great, and I can't wait for you all to see it, so let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is add a binder for our rubs to stick to the beef ribs. We've chosen to use a yellow mustard here because typically in the long, low, and slow cooks, the mustard itself is going to burn off, but the rub and flavor is going to remain behind. So it's really a great binder to use here. And if you need to, don't be afraid to add more mustard. You're really going to not taste any of that mustard flavor. It's going to be all rub at the end, so lather it up as much as needed. And as you can see here, we're going to leave the silver skin on the back side of the ribs. And even though there's a little meat there on this set specifically, typically there's not going to be very much meat on the back side. And the membrane is going to hold those beef ribs together so they're not just falling apart while they're on the smoker. We're just going to make sure that these are nicely lathered up, and then we're going to move on to adding our rub. The first addition that we're going to have here is going to be Adams Rib Rubb. It's a real fine powdery rub, so we're going to toss a whole bunch on it and then kind of spread it out before patting it down. It typically comes in a bag, but we had an extra shaker lying around, so that's what we're using here today. It's actually an old Parmesan cheese bottle, so that you can see that it's coming out quite heavy, but that's alright. When we just spread it around, it'll even out. And you're going to want to make sure that you get all sides, and if you have to go back over it with a little bit more mustard, go ahead and do so. We had to on this side specifically, but we want to make sure that we get enough rub down on it that's sticking to the ribs themselves. And even though we've got that silver skin membrane on the back side of the ribs, we're going to go ahead and add some seasoning to them as well, just in case you get a little bite of it. You want it to all taste good. And really make sure you're hitting every side with it. You want to get it all nice and rubbed in. And we have this big chunk of meat on the back side here. It's a little bit of fat, but you can choose to remove that. We decided to go ahead and leave it on since it's a home cook. This isn't a competition right here. And finally, we're going to add some black pepper to it just because we really like that flavor here. We're not going to go too heavy with it, just hitting the top sides here, making sure that we get enough of that black pepper in the bites, but not overpowering the actual rib rub. You can see here we hit every single side there. The black pepper's on top. The rub's all been patted into the meat itself. And now it's time to add it to the smoker. Alright, now that we've gotten these put onto the smoker, we're going to be sure to let them smoke for about 3 hours at 250. We want to let them get a real nice red color going on, get the smoke flavor hitting them really nicely before we start spritzing them. And we're going to spritz these every hour on the hour using a mixture of vinegar and water. It's about 1/3 a cup of vinegar for 2/3 cup water. Just really keep these nice and moisturized. It took quite a few hours to get these finally cooked, but when they reach that point, they just look absolutely beautiful. We ended up pulling these at 205 degrees and couldn't be happier with how they turned out. Okay, so we just pulled these off of our smoker and they are looking great. We took them to about 205 degrees where they were probe tender, And now you want to make sure that you are cooking to that feel rather than to an exact time or temperature. They can be done anywhere around that 200 mark, so just be sure you're checking that probe. The next step is going to be to wrap these guys, and we're going to be using butcher paper. So let's get to wrapping. Alright, so for these we've chosen to use some butcher paper to wrap the ribs up in, and you can see we're trying to decide exactly how we want to wrap them. But you can use anything that you've got around to wrap them, whether that be just basic parchment paper, butcher paper, or another great choice is aluminum foil. The key here is to make sure you get a nice tight wrap on them, just so you're not losing the heat, but you're allowing the meat to rest whenever you put it either in a cooler or a resting area. And you want to be sure that you let the meat rest for at least an hour. We're looking at an hour and a half, 2 hours for these, and it's going to allow the juice to reabsorb into the meat itself, so you're not losing any on the cutting board. Once these are wrapped up, we're going to throw these in an ice chest and just let them sit there for a few hours, and then we'll come back to them. Okay, so it's been about an hour and a half since we first wrapped these up, and now it's time to get into them. But before we do that, I want to just cover what we did before we got to this point. We started off with 2 racks of ribs, and we rubbed them down with yellow mustard before hitting them with the Adams Ultimate Rub and a little bit of black pepper to give it a nice bark and a good flavor. We then put it on our smoker at 250 for 3 hours, at which point we started spritzing every hour on the hour until they hit an internal temperature of about 203. We ended up pulling ours at 205, but that's okay because you're looking for that probe tenderness, not an exact temperature. We then wrapped it and let it rest for an hour and a half, and we've now reached this point. So let's go ahead, unwrap it, and get into it. Alright, so we've got these sliced up, and all it's left to do is take a bite. Thanks for watching our video on beef ribs. Be sure to leave us a comment down below and hit that subscribe button.